So we started out this forgiveness series using Ephesians, and we've spent a couple weeks in Matthew looking at Jesus and the practical elements. And so now we're back in Ephesians this week as we close out. This Ephesians chapter 4 is a grounding text. It's a challenging text and one that reminds us of the overall scope of what we're about as we live into our Christian faith in our world and in our church and in our private lives. So let's get into it and begin with a word of prayer. Oh God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. As I've said each week, the word forgiveness in Greek simply means letting go. Now, if you have experienced forgiveness or gone through that in your life, you know from experience that forgiveness is not a one and done kind of situation. It is a process, it is a way of life. Forgiveness, letting go, can lead to reconciling. It can also lead to setting boundaries and making it so that that person cannot harm you again. There are several things that have to happen that require us to kind of get in those places. So what I'm doing in these 4 weeks is to talk about the first side of it, that letting go, that forgiveness piece of this journey. I read a little parable this week as I was reflecting on this that brought this home for me. And it was describing a gardener and a plot of land. Now, I'm not a gardener. I bring things home to die. It's just how life works for me when it comes to vegetation. My husband loves to tease me when he sees plants coming home, and he's like, oh, these are your victims, you know. So I don't personally relate to what it means to take care of a garden, but I thought this image was really beautiful, and I know that some of you do. So the image is of a person who has a small plot of land, and over time, every time the person comes out, it begins to fill with weeds. And every day, the gardener goes out and sees the weeds, but steps over them because the gardener doesn't have time to deal with the weeds. The gardener wants to deal with the beautiful plants that are planted around in the garden. One day, a neighbor comes to see the garden, and so the gardener realizes that there are weeds among all these beautiful plants. And so she apologizes to her neighbor and says, I don't know why it's like this. I planted plenty of good seed. The neighbor replies, you planted good things, yes, but you never pulled the weeds. Forgiveness is a pulling the weeds. Forgiveness is a process. Forgiveness isn't usually a one and done dramatic event. It is the daily bending down. It is evaluating and pulling weeds. It is watering and tilling up the soil of our hearts and removing what doesn't belong. Sometimes it even springs up overnight after we think we've done some significant work. Have you had that happen before, where you've done some work around forgiveness and letting go, and then the very next day a trigger is in front of you, and right there it's sprung up again? It's like it found a new life. It's something that we constantly do, something that we constantly deal with. I shared with you a couple of weeks ago that the feeling of forgiveness, that feeling of letting go, is worth the process, worth focusing on doing the work that you need to do. And last week, I shared with you that Jesus offers a formula, if you will, for forgiveness. He borrows a method from his Jewish upbringing, and he adapts it to fit kind of an early church model. And the method is this: if someone does wrong, then you confront them one-on-one. If they don't listen, you take a couple of trusted people. If they still won't listen, you take them in front of the whole church. Now, as I said to you last week, unfortunately, churches have taken this text literally. Some of you may have been a part of churches that took this literally and applied it when calling people out who they, as the church, have deemed are sinners. And those situations cause real harm. There are a million stories of people who have been harmed by churches and who do not want to return to churches because of those traumatic experiences. Now, one of the reasons why this isn't a great method for us in the modern time is because the church is not God. We do not get to sit in the place of judgment. And usually that is where us human beings like to go. We like to get in the judgment seat if we can. We do not like to be judged. So instead of receiving this formula as something that we might reenact here 2,000 years later, I think we look under the surface of it and we see that what Jesus is affirming here is that Jesus believes in justice, that Jesus believes in honesty, that Jesus believes in bringing secret things out into the open for the sake of healing, for the sake of moving beyond, for the sake of letting go. So forgiveness is a process. One I offered last week is that you can, one, acknowledge the experience, feel it, name it, understand it, look at it. Then number two, you express it. In borrowing Jesus' model, you can express it to a trusted friend or a counselor or a group of people that can communicate clearly with you and that will hold space for you and won't judge you for the way that the situation made you feel, because you can't help how it made you feel. And you were hurt and you deserve to be heard and held and loved. A third step is to remember what it feels like to let go of stuff, so that you can continue to press through those hard feelings toward that feeling of letting go. And then unfortunately, number four is repeat. Repeat it as often as needed, because you deserve to walk in freedom. You deserve to not carry burdens with you every day of your life. I also came across a quote this week that connected for me. It said, "Forgiveness is not an emotion. Forgiveness is an act of the will. And the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart." These are words by Corrie ten Boom. Corrie ten Boom was a Dutch watchmaker who protected Jewish neighbors of hers, and then ended up going to a concentration camp as a result of that, alongside her dad and her sister. She is a Christian and a speaker and was able to survive World War II and come out of the concentration camp and shared about her experiences. And so this is a quote from her. "Forgiveness is not an emotion, it's an act of the will, and the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart." Regardless of the temperature of the heart. She tells a story about one time being at a church in Germany where she was sharing her testimony and her experiences of being in the concentration camp, and how while she was sharing, she looked out and caught eyes with a man who had been one of the soldiers at the camp where she was captured. She writes that it gutted her when she saw that man, that it was a re-traumatizing for her of all the experiences. She said that everything went still and she could not think, she could barely move, but she continued to speak. And after that experience was over, the man actually came forward to speak to her because he also recognized her. Can you imagine? And he reached out her hand, and she said nothing in her wanted to touch that man. And so she stood still and looked him in the eye, and he said, "I'm a Christian now." And she said, "That is good." That's all she could say. But she said that God was able to give her strength in that moment. She didn't have to extend her hand in friendship to that man. She didn't have to allow him to bring up all the experiences that he had caused. But she also found herself in a surprising place to not, punch him in the face. That's what I would feel, right? Do you have that feeling? I just want to punch that person in the face, or do whatever she wanted to do. Instead, she was able to stand with her head held high, knowing that she was held by God in that moment. The situations we experience, friends, at the hands of others are not simple, and they are not straightforward. And we can get caught in cycles that harm us and others. Even in the wider community, we see situations unfolding, and the way in which our neighbors have been painted as our enemies these days is disturbing. It's amazing to me that you can pull up different news sources, and the headlines for the day, the top 3, are all completely different depending on which news source you read, blocking people who look at different sources and making us not able to speak even clearly to one another about what the truth is in a given situation. Lack of understanding in our culture right now around immigrants or people whose skin looks different than our own, or the way that people talk about those in need of help and services these days. The number of kids in our community that go hungry is beyond what we can imagine. And none of it's simple. It all takes work. It takes work to be a good neighbor. It takes work to offer understanding. It takes work to see through the politics and all the other things to the human being in front of us. It takes mining down past our own biases and prejudices and allegiances to the truth. The truth about you, which is you are God's beloved child. The truth about the person that you are looking at, which is that they are also God's beloved child. Ephesians chapter 4 reminds us that this is the work that we do. And it's not one and done, and it's not easy. It is a process. It is a process. It is something we do not do alone, but we do in community with one another. We hold fast to what is good. We see past the politics, the people harmed by the policies. We don't turn a blind eye to those who are hurting around us, whether they need food, shelter, security, or just to know that they are not alone. Putting our relationships and our love for others over being right about everything, because Jesus commands us to love one another. And Jesus embodies that love as he engages with those who have been forgotten and marginalized, as he invites children front and center, as he makes eye contact with those who have been shamed, as he sits at tables that other people gossip about, as he shares meals with all manner of human beings, from the rich and powerful to those whose names aren't even written down. As Jesus insists on dying a horrible death, rather than lifting a finger to harm his oppressors. Following Jesus starts with forgiveness, friends. So here is your invitation this week. Tell the truth where you've been hiding it, and listen to what the trusted people around you tell you that they see in you. Begin to confront and deal with your hurt or your anger or your resentment, that thing that tightens in your shoulders that you're carrying around, maybe in your heart, depending on where you hold stress in your body. Begin to confront that, to name it. Busy yourself with doing something that brings good into the world. Maybe encourage someone who you know needs it, or give someone food, or speak on behalf of someone who's being judged or marginalized. Take one step, not because you're strong enough, but because Christ is present in you. May we become a people who pull up the weeds of bitterness, who open our hands where resentment once closed them, who speak words that build and don't break, who forgive again and again, because God has forgiven us.